Dr. Bennett, do you feel like there is a mental health crisis happening in America when it comes to student athletes and what they have to face today?
I don't know if I would use that word. I think there's more recognition now than ever that there's some particular challenges in terms of mental health that student athletes face that, I mean, they've been dealing with for a long time. Um, I think COVID has like exacerbated a lot of those things. So, there's been a whole lot of press about recent student athletes dying by suicide, which, those are really sad stories, and those have gotten attention, and certainly I think caused a lot of administrators to look more closely at the way student athlete mental health is being addressed.
Well, Dr. Bennett, you've been doing this for nearly 3 decades now with Virginia Tech. What's changed even in the last 5 years or so with the types of issues and the types of struggles that student athletes are facing these days? Because it's safe to say that the world that they're growing up in is a very different world from the world that you and I grew up in.
Absolutely. Uh, Two words: social media. That is a huge difference. Um, when I was playing baseball in college, I hate to think what it would have been like if every move I made was going to be, recorded and maybe sent out on the internet. Um, and, up until a few years ago, other than newspaper stories or, a TV report like yours, student athletes wouldn't see much attention to what they were doing on or off the field. Not every move is kind of scrutinized, and there's no avoiding it. A coach could tell someone, don't look at the headlines, don't watch this news story, but it's hard to tell someone to say, you can't look at your social media feeds. And student athletes are much more accessible. People can be just kind of brutal on some of those platforms.
I'm curious, Dr. Bennett, what are some of the conversations you're having with other mental health professionals around the country? What trends are you seeing? And what solutions are you talking about in order to tackle some of the issues that athletes are facing?
Yeah, I work on a couple of committees with other folks around the country. And, I think the biggest challenge has been, making sure athletic departments have resources available. If you don't have people available to help student athletes, that I think that's step one. And I've been involved with the NCAA for years. I think every Power Five school now has at least one mental health clinician in their department, and many have two, three, or four or more. And I think right now there's much more attention being paid to the whole suicide prevention aspect of things. Last fall we did a suicide prevention program for our whole department. Every team took part in that. So yeah, I just think we're trying to get people more aware of what the warning signs are and how to intervene if you see a teammate or a friend who may be exhibiting some of those signs.
You discussed lack of resources. Is that part of the issue? Because Power Five schools obviously have the financial resources to provide for psychological help for student athletes, but are you seeing that lag with some of the smaller schools, some of the non-Power Five schools? JMU is about to be a Group of Five school entering the Sun Belt. Are you seeing that kind of be an issue with Division II and Division III programs? Is there a lag between the Power Five and everyone else?
Absolutely. The Power Five schools just financially have a lot more resources. For a long time, we could see that financially they could have positions like we have, but they were choosing not to. But then once I think the NCAA got more involved, kind of made it a little bit more of a priority. So the Power Five schools can afford it. yeah, those smaller schools or Division II, Division III conferences and teams have to scramble and find other resources, whether it's the campus counseling center or maybe consulting with someone off campus. But yeah, that is a huge challenge, David.
So I'm going to take it in this direction then. At what point is this now an NCAA issue where people's lives are at stake because not every athlete has the resources that, to be honest, should probably become standard now across the board?
Well, I don't think it's the kind of thing that NCAA can mandate. That they can strongly encourage it, and they have. But I don't think the NCAA has that kind of authority to say you have to do this. Could they contribute some more financial resources? I mean, I would think they could, but I don't really know where they stand with that right now.
So clearly a lot of work to be done on a national level to address this issue. But let's kind of take it back down to a micro level here. So if I'm a student athlete, or if I'm in high school looking to become a student athlete and I'm struggling, what's the best piece of advice you can give?
Talk to somebody, anybody. It might be your coach, it might be a minister, a teammate, but you don't have to suffer in silence. Certainly, if you can have access to a mental health professional, that would be great. I mean, there's still a little bit of a stigma, particularly for athletes and male athletes, to seek that kind of help. Hopefully that is diminishing some, but yeah, I mean, it's just important to not suffer in silence and let that kind of fester and grow.
Well, it's also a team effort, and we talk about it in the mental health community about having a good support group. If I'm a coach, if I'm a parent, especially if I'm a coach or a parent of an athlete in the high school level where you're starting to think about your son or daughter trying to move up into playing in the college level, how can I be that piece of support for that student athlete? And how can I also remove some of the pressure that isn't really necessary for student athletes to face these days?
Well, I mean, parents have a key role in that, the way they are handling their son or daughter's preparation. And I mean, parents can put a whole lot of pressure in ways that sometimes will cause their children to turn away from their sport. And the other thing, David, is there's such a specialization in sports now. Again, when I was growing up playing, every season in the fall we had one sport, winter another sport, spring a different sport. And now a lot of athletes play the same thing year round. And, they risk getting burned out, which can certainly lead to some mental health challenges.
Is there anything else that a coach can do? I mean, say an athlete comes to a coach, if I'm a coach, I don't have the tools necessarily to maybe deal with that, but what can I do in order to deal with an athlete that is struggling?
Yeah, I mean, I think listen, try to withhold judgment, be supportive of, it's okay to talk about these things, and, be prepared to make a referral somewhere. If someone comes to you and they are clearly struggling, they're having symptoms of depression or anxiety, like know what your next move would be. Where would you advise the person to go if they need a little bit more of a professional resource?
And you mentioned social media, and we kind of talk about preventative measures as well. What are some strategies that athletes can do right now to avoid going down a path that is dark and would prevent any struggle in the future? I mean, probably limiting social media use would maybe be one strategy right there.
Yeah, I mean, that's an obvious one, but that's also probably not realistic. I mean, I think, maybe educating our student athletes a little bit more about the nature of social media, like whose opinions really matter in your life. Is it some stranger that you're never going to meet, or your teammates, your family, your coaches. Um, you know, a lot of athletes they're looking for approval, and how many likes you get for a post or how many followers you have is one way to get approval, but you can also get it in I think more meaningful ways from people who are already in your life.
Coach DeMore, when I was talking to him about this topic about mental health, he said the biggest piece of advice he was giving to his team was perspective. Is that kind of the biggest takeaway that you give a lot of student athletes, is that, hey, try to put everything in perspective? Yeah, sports has been a big part of your life, but it's not everything.
That's great. Coach DeMore is really good at that. He's, I think he is probably ahead of his time in terms of what a lot of coaches are. And, he emphasizes that. He cares about his student athletes, and I have a lot of respect for him.
Where do you want to see this conversation about mental health go, especially when it comes to the struggles that student athletes face on a college campus when they're dealing with so many things? Where do you want this conversation to kind of lead and evolve in the next few years?
I think probably the biggest thing is continuing to reduce the stigma, particularly for athletes and male athletes, to ask for help. Being able to normalize that actually is sort of a sign of strength to be able to say, I need some help. So I think to the extent that we can continue that effort, it's going to help people get, whatever resources they need.
Well, Dr. Bennett, I really appreciate the time. I think this conversation will be very beneficial to a lot of people, especially student athletes and their parents and their coaches. So thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.